Welcome to another episode of The Music Crypt with Dan Montgomery, and this is episode number 9, if you can believe, Dan. And today, Dan had a great idea. We're going to talk about some of our favorite live albums. And I know, Dan, you and I, our lists are a little bit different, but interestingly enough, we have some of the same albums. So I guess we'll get this kicked off with my number one. Number one on my list would be Kiss Alive 1. This is the album. The original Kiss album came back, came out in 1975, and on our very first episode, you were sharing with me that what a huge Kiss fan you were. That your very first album you ever bought was Rock and Roll Over, which so just the year before this album came out. But at the time they released Kiss Alive because the first three Kiss albums, they really didn't sell, but people were kind of starting to see that there was something going on with the band live, and this Kiss Alive album, it just put them over the top for whatever reason. So what are your thoughts on this album right off the bat?
Well, I think that was, how do you put it together, the perfect formula for a perfect album.
Yeah, I think the only thing could have made it.
And then it was only like years later. Where they came out and said, most of it was all overdubbed. Back in the studio, the only thing they couldn't really redo was Peter Criss's drums.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that kind of like blew up the image.
Yeah.
But you still go back and listen to the album, and you're right there in the crowd.
Yeah, I'll tell you what the test for me is. Okay. I don't really care about any of that because I'm not an engineer or nothing. To me, I put that album on and it still sounds, it sounds like I'm there. I'm convinced that I'm in the audience. It just sounds, and if that's overdubbing, as Paul Stanley would say, whatever it takes to deliver, I guess, a good product. But that's the true test, I think, that all those years ago, when the album first came out, nobody knew what we know today. And now you can go back and say, oh yeah, you can tell, but not really. Nobody really had a clue until, that they let that out of the bag.
And told everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody thought it was all just recorded live, one show.
And the other thing about Kiss Alive 1 is, I dare say that was, that set the standard for live albums back then.
Yeah, it absolutely did.
You forget when it was on, initially just on vinyl, which predates, CDs and even cassettes. Do you remember, Dan, getting that and opening the double gatefold and, wow, what is this?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like when you open it up and you see what's going on. You look at the back cover and you see the crowd, and then of course you're pulling out all the goodies that came in all the Kiss records, and you're just like, wow, this is just really super cool.
Yeah, and
it was just a perfect, and they set a standard, I think, from that date forward.
Oh yeah,
basically, if you're gonna do a live album, this is how you have to do it.
Yeah.
If you want it to be any good, other than like some of the bootleg recordings and some of the stuff that never really actually got published. It was history making.
In fact, coming out in June, they have a new thing. It's another new live album. I'm interested to hear what it sounds like. It's called it's a recording of Kiss in Tokyo, Japan, I believe. Recorded off the soundboard. That's supposed to be an official release coming out in June. So I'd be interested to see what that sounds like. And again, getting back to Kiss Alive 1, not only did it set the standard for live albums, but set the standard for Kiss, because if you go back and you listen to those first 3 Kiss albums, they're very raw. Like a lot of bands early in their career, they were hungry back then. They're really raw and in your face. And even especially the first Kiss album, the debut solo album from debut Kiss album from 1973. They had such a raw sound, but the albums, for whatever reason, were not selling back then. It would be this album that would really put Kiss on the map. Had they not released this album, it might have just been Dressed to Kill, and the record company I've read over the years was getting ready to drop Kiss at that point. So this is the album that really not only put Kiss on the map, but saved them.
Yeah, definitely did.
And then getting back to the back cover you were talking about, they have those 2 Kiss fans holding the sign on the back. In fact, that became such an iconic image that years later, I think, by the time they had done Kiss Alive 3, that was such an iconic photo. They invited those two guys years later to come see Kiss in concert. And that, I mean, as a fan, how cool is that you become part of history, you know?
Yeah, that's really cool.
And I think for a lot of people too, Kiss Alive 1 holds a special place because that was recorded at Coba Hall in Detroit, which it's been since demolished. It's no longer there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then Kiss Alive 2, let's talk about that. I'm going to kind of put all the Kiss albums together because the thing is, by the time 1977 comes around after the Love Gun tour, where they recorded this album in Los Angeles, I believe, at the LA Forum, they were still recording a lot of, they're still playing a lot of the same songs they were in the set list. That's why they decided to record the new studio tracks, because they just didn't have enough new material to add to the set list. And so, what are your thoughts on that? Kind of adding, having studio tracks on what's supposed to be a live album.
I thought when I first heard they were putting studio tracks on a live album, I'm like, oh, what a ripoff.
Yeah.
But then you hear the music and you're like, it's cool.
Yeah.
But like Alive 2, that's like that was kind of like after they had stepped up their stage show game to to this whole other beast that they became.
Yeah, you look at the guys on the cover of that. Like Gene Simmons, he's got blood all over his face. He's sweating to death. But it's like, man, you look at those photos. That's no doubt. Live. You know what I mean? It's live and in your face. And you kind of feel. I didn't really mind having the studio tracks because as a fan in general, I always dig when when bands put out like extra stuff. Like I felt like I was getting a little something extra. Okay. Well, rather than waiting until next year when they put out a new studio, I'm getting 4 new tunes, so that's kind of cool as well. And then another thing that came out, but it doesn't really bother me, the fact that the only new track that Ace Frehley played on was Rocket Ride. It really didn't bother me that they brought in Bob Kulick. Again, they're killer tunes, and so I don't really care about any of that. It's like, they dressed it up like Kiss, it sounded like Kiss, it looked like Kiss. That's all that really mattered to me. Yeah.
You know what I mean? As long as there was somebody who looked like Ace Frehley up there, it was still the same guy.
Yeah. Ace was up there on stage, but they brought Bob Kulick to do some of those studio tracks, and that was a well-kept secret for many, many years. And it's kind of interesting because we know all these little interesting facts that we didn't know back then. But again, to me, it sounds just good. It doesn't really. They had the actual guy up there on stage. Now, people question what they're doing with Tommy Thayer, but again. It's not the original band, but they deliver the goods live still. So I think if you had a mediocre band up there and it wasn't sounding as good, there wouldn't be much purpose to doing. But people are still going to see Kiss by the droves,
Yeah, for sure.
And
definitely filling up the arenas.
Yeah. and by the time Kiss Alive 3 came out in '93, that was recorded, of course, on the Revenge tour, and I had a chance, last year to talk to Mark Scott. He's the drummer from Trickster, and he was telling me what a huge Kiss fan he is. And he was saying on one of on the Revenge tour, Trickster got to open up for Kiss, when they were recording Alive 3, and he says, "Could you imagine being a Kiss fan like I am? And then not only does your band get to open for them, but you get to be there the very night they're recording something like Alive 3, and I got to go in the trucks and kind of see what they were doing." He said, as a Kiss fan, it was just the ultimate dream come true.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think, too, the interesting thing about Kiss Alive 3, for many years, they kept talking about, there was this build-up to Kiss Alive 3, and they kept talking about it, and they finally, I think the only thing that would have made Kiss Alive 3 better is if they had released it when Eric Carr was still alive, because then we'd have something, some live material from that era. Nothing against Eric Singer. I think he's a phenomenal drummer, great addition to Kiss. That's the only thing. But unlike Alive 2, I think Kiss Alive 3 was more balanced in that you had stuff not just from the 70s, but you had stuff from the 80s era as well on Kiss Alive 3. And,
by the time Alive 3 came out, I had pretty much stopped listening to them.
Yeah. And
so it's like, I saw they had another live album come out, and this is like,
yeah.
But I don't think I've maybe listened to it maybe once or twice.
Yeah, I'll be honest there. I listened to it a lot when it first came out, and I think like if I put it on today, it makes for a decent listen, but it's not one that I naturally go to. And if I put it on, I like it for that fact alone that it's got songs from both eras of the band, the 70s and the 80s. Final album we're gonna mention that's Kiss related is that I think is a really honorable mention here is Kiss Unplugged, because I mean, first of all, you have Ace and Peter. That's when the reunion and everything really launched as a result of that. But I mean, the thing with Kiss Unplugged, I think it's one of the best Unplugged shows ever, and Kiss had never done anything like that before. I mean, a lot of bands were doing it at that time, but Kiss was finally, I guess, jumping on the bandwagon, if you want to say. But as a Kiss fan, I'd never heard these songs performed that way. And so, number one, Kiss Unplugged, they gave some of these tunes a new life. And then you had songs like, Coming Home, that goes all the way back to Hotter Than Hell. And they'd stopped performing that for a number of years. They record that for Kiss Unplugged, and man, first of all, you forgot about this great forgotten song, and it gave it a new life, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so, so that's number one. Number two on my list, which was also on your list, Dan, and you can tell me why. Cheap Trick live at BootCon. Now, very much like Kiss Alive, I think this is one of those iconic live albums for a simple fact that it really did put Cheap Trick on the map as a live act. I mean, I think you and I have had this discussion before, but the hit that came off this album was I Want You to Want Me Now. If you go back to like I think it was the first or second Cheap Trick album, you listen to the original studio version of that, it sounds two completely different songs. I mean, the original studio version sounds like a swampy country song, and this live album gave that song a new life. I mean, it put Cheap Trick on the map, and again, very much like Kiss Alive, I think it's one of those live albums we still talk about all these years later that set the standard for live albums.
Yeah, definitely. I think somewhere, on the internet, there's so many lists, but I think it's Live at Budokan is listed in easily in like the top 10, one of the top 10 live albums. Yeah, and I dare say, and then like maybe about 10 or 15 years ago, they released this thing called Budokan 2, which what it really was is they just added songs to the that were left off the original release that were also featured in the same concert. And as a fan, it's kind of an interesting, I guess, snapshot. But I much prefer the original version without every single song, and I think maybe it's just because that's what I'm used to. The songs that were left off, they weren't like the main songs that you'd want to hear anyways, and then also the artwork wasn't I guess I love the original artwork better, and sometimes which we're going to talk to when we get down the list here, the packaging or repackaging really can have an effect on if you want to buy something or not. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, number 3 on my list was Deep Purple's Made in Japan. Now, I'm a huge Deep Purple fan, but anybody knows anything about Made in Japan, it was a big hit for Deep Purple, and again, very much like Cheap Trick and Kiss before, and Kiss at the time. This was kind of forced by the record company, and Deep Purple really didn't want to release it, but they were getting bigger and bigger in Japan, and despite the band not kind of being forced into it, it became a huge hit for them. So, I mean, what I dig about it is that this is not even some Deep Purple plan to do. It's kind of really just the fans speaking and going out and buying the album, saying, we think Deep Purple is just a super live act. If you ever seen the original band live in concert, I mean, Richie Blackmore back in the day, man, he was someone to see.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
And especially John Lord on keyboards. I mean, that's the guy when people tell me keyboards suck. I say no, you go listen to all those early Deep Purple albums and you listen to what John Lord did, and then you say that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like Deep Purple, they had the keyboards figured out.
Yeah. And Boston was another band that really made the keyboards work for them. Number 4 on my list is the Thin Lizzy, Live and Dangerous. Again, this is one of those iconic albums. When you read all these lists about people's favorite live albums, Thin Lizzy's Live and Dangerous is always on those lists. And I felt it was important to include this in our list, Dan, my list rather, because Thin Lizzy's one of those great classic rock bands, and people think, Thin Lizzy, all they ever did was like The Boys Are Back in Town or Whiskey in the Jar. If you really dig into the catalog, there's a lot of great tunes, and I mean, I can't believe they've been snubbed by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame like 2 or 3 times now. They're definitely should be in there by now.
Yeah, they don't think they go off of actual music. I think it's all politics more than music.
Yeah, even with Iron Maiden, they didn't get included like for the second or third time this year. But I think a lot of these guys that run the Rock and Roll, I don't think they even know anything about Iron Maiden. Okay, they nominate bands like Judas Priest. Oh, what's a metal band? Oh, Priest, Black Sabbath. We know these bands, and then at the same time they might they nominate a band like T-Rex, which they deserve to be in, but I don't know that T-Rex should be in, before Iron Maiden or Judas Priest, but whatever. Like I was reading something about before they announced Maiden didn't make it, they were announcing, the Foo Fighters and Iron Maiden, it doesn't look like they're going to make it this year. I'm like, yeah, right. I know nothing against the Foo Fighters, great band, but but I'm like, the Foo Fighters are a pop band, so I bet they get in, and they did.
That would figure.
Yeah, and so I included it for that reason, and again, it just reminds us, people, what a great band they are. 5, Peter Frampton. Frampton Comes Alive. Again, I'm not a huge diehard Peter Frampton fan, but I included it on my list because, it's kind of one of those live albums that set the standard for its time. It was big. Now, interesting thing with Frampton Comes Alive, unlike any of these other acts we've mentioned so far, that was like Peter Frampton at his kind of, when he had reached the pinnacle. I mean, it put him on the map as a solo artist, but it seems like even to this day, he's never really had that same kind of commercial success
never been that big again.
As a solo artist. Yeah.
That was like his top of. It's kind of like every once in a while you'll run into a band that just kind of like takes over the world for a little while.
Yeah. In fact, I mean,
and that was kind of like when he was ruling the world.
Top of his game. Yeah, top of his game.
Every radio station had his tunes playing.
Yeah, and people kind of forgot at that time that before going solo, that he was in Humble Pie, another band, another great classic band that I recently have discovered because of both Ace Frehley and the Dead Daisies. They did both those bands did a great cover of 30 Days in the Hole. Now, I don't know if you've heard the original version done by Humble Pie, but I tell you, Steve Marriott, the singer from Humble Pie, it's a lot more of a bluesy song, but I just love it. It's a totally different version than what you get with the Dead Daisies or Ace Frehley, but any version you hear, it's a great tune. And again, Peter Frampton, an interesting thing, like you said, he never, that was kind of a heap of his commercial success as a solo artist. He tried to, I think, recapture a number of years later where he put out like Frampton Comes Alive 2 or something, but again, never reached that level. And kind of the only thing that really brought him back, he's got a new studio album out, and I think what kind of really put him back on the map is when David Bowie took him out as a guitar player on the road with him, like in the early 90s. Thank you, David Bowie, but that's why he's still out there,
Yeah.
And now number 6, I'd like to get your thoughts on, Dan. I put, Judas Priest. They've got two pretty good live albums now. Like a lot of people, I prefer Unleashed in the East just because that's, again, the original live release from that band. But like in 1987, they released Priest Live, which was kind of is a combination of stuff from the 80s and 70s. So I liked it for that reason. But I think the original Unleashed in the East was a much better sounding live album. You put that on, you almost, again, like Kiss Alive or Budokan, you almost swear you were in the audience,
Yeah, Unleashed in the East was another epic live album.
Yeah.
It's just some of the, just the order of the songs.
Yeah.
It's like you almost expect to hear those songs in that order.
Yeah, at a Priest show.
If you're listening to a studio album or on the radio, you expect to hear it.
Yeah.
You expect to hear it.
Now number 8,
it's just an awesome show. 1,000 shows probably.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a very good recording.
And again, at that point, Unleashed in the East, you have almost the entire original band as far as even there's a singer that predated Halford, but the band that we all know and love with Halford, that's probably the last thing they did with the original lineup. And then number 8 on my list is Ted Nugent's Double Live Gonzo. And a lot of people these days are not a huge fan of Ted Nugent because of what he says politically. I don't really care about all that because I put the album on and just, okay, do I like this or do I dislike it? I love it because, again, it's one of those live albums. Seems to have been forgotten, but at its time, it was a great sounding live album. You put it on. I mean, you got the one track you really want to hear, Cat Scratch Fever, on there. And again, this is one of those albums. It was a double album, very much like Budokan and Kiss Alive. You'd open it up, and just a great package, You went and bought that, and again, had all the songs. They had Stranglehold on there, all the songs you'd want to hear Ted Nugent do in concert. And you could put that on and say, okay, if you go to see Ted Nugent, that's what you're going to get,
Yeah, that one was an awesome album. Yeah. And then that one's definitely on my list. And then I had Intensity.
Uh-huh.
That was his second live album.
Okay, now.
And it's pretty freaking epic as well.
And now you also had on your list, I don't know if this was when Ted Nugent was in the band or not, but you also had a live album by the Amboy Dukes on your list?
Yeah, that was just, I think they actually were calling them Ted Nugent and the Amboy Dukes at the time.
Yeah.
But like the last 21 minutes of that album, it's called Prodigal Son.
Okay.
If you've never heard that,
that's one to check out.
You've got to hear it before you die.
Yeah, I mean, I listened.
It's an awesome track.
I listened to Amboy Dukes, and I think the sad thing for that band is they're one of those bands. The only reason we know them because Ted Nugent was in the band originally, but I think Ted Nugent going solo kind of made people forget about that band. But I'm not even probably as familiar as you are with them, Dan. But I'm aware the band exists because, of course, I'm a Ted Nugent fan. Now I want to get your thoughts on one I have for number 9 on my list is Black Sabbath, Past Lives versus Live at Last. Now, originally was released. Now you're saying this was a show from 1973 that they released in 1980. Now, originally when they released it as Live as Last, I didn't think it was. I didn't really care for the album cover, of artwork. It didn't have a ton of tunes on it. Kind of like a limited release. It had been out of print for years, and then a couple years ago they reissued it as Past Lives. They included, I guess, the rest of the songs that were not on the original packaging. You open it up, it's a much nicer photo on the cover, and they retitle it. Now, sometimes they do this and they try to trick people thinking they're buying something new. That didn't seem to bother me because I did like the packaging. I just thought I was getting a better product the second time around. What are your thoughts on that, Dan?
I never bought the second one.
Okay.
I stayed with the first one.
Okay, interesting.
I got it. It was kind of funny. I got it when it was vinyl, of course. But every once in a while, like when they would open up a crate of vinyl, they would accidentally cut the covers.
Yeah.
And you'd see a little cut in the cover, and they ended up throwing these over in like a discount bin.
Oh, okay, that's what that was originally.
And they weren't wrapped.
Yeah.
Because when they cut the saran wrap or whatever on there.
Wow.
So they were just kind of tossed in a discount bin.
Interesting.
I'm shuffling through there, and I see this one sitting on top. Live at Last, Black Sabbath, and I'm like, so this I'd already gotten Heaven and Hell, right?
Yeah.
And then my second album was Volume 4.
Yeah. Wow.
And so that was my third Black Sabbath album.
Yeah. Now, have you been getting any of these new Black Sabbath like stuff that they've been?
Re-releases and stuff.
Yeah.
No, I keep up on it, but I'm not gonna. I don't think I'm gonna go out of my way to get them.
Yeah.
Because I don't personally.
Yeah.
If I could just have the music as it was on vinyl.
Okay.
That's the way I would listen to it. crackles, hisses, pops, all that stuff, all the good stuff that was originally included. Because it just gave a character. Now it gets all crisp. And it kind of takes away some of the fun, I guess.
It's interesting. It's interesting. I did buy the reissue for Volume 4 that just came out, and I guess the cool thing for me is I was willing to pay the $46 because they did repackage it so nice. I mean, you get a nice huge box. I mean, I'll be honest, I just love the box and the way they packaged it, and then you get 3 or 4 bonus discs of older live material that wasn't out there. So again, I feel like if I'm going to spend $46 for something, I'm getting extra stuff thrown in there. Maybe that's just me being stupid, I don't know. But then you get a nice book that kind of tells you kind of a history and what was going on in the band at the time. So there you get all these little goodies that weren't there before. So I think that's kind of interesting. We'll see. And then number 10 on my list was Van Halen live at Tokyo Dome. This was, interesting enough, the final thing we get from Van Halen. They were going to get back together, but Eddie's health just got worse and worse, and never able to get back together. But I'm like, if this is the final thing we get from Van Halen, it's great to have a live album with David Lee Roth, because up until that point we only had Live Right Here, Right Now, which was from the Sammy Hagar era of the band. Another great lineup, but like a lot of people, the original lineup was it for me. I dug both eras of the band, but I thought, okay, we finally released, now we got a live album from the Dave era, and we got a live album from the Sammy era, and of course that live album is also features Eddie's son Wolfgang, which kind of launched him. So interesting way for a band to come to an end, but I dig it too, because we got live versions of all those great classic era tunes that were not available previously. The only thing I think could have made it better is, and I don't know why they didn't think of this, because they definitely had the technology at the time, was why not record and include a live DVD to go with it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What was the Iron Maiden album that was live when it first came out? It was a vinyl record, and you could get a VCR tape with it.
Oh, live. I'm not sure, but probably my favorite Iron Maiden live album, and I listed it as Live After Death, and that's because at this point they've released so many live albums, but I don't know why. Maybe that was the first one they released, but that's the one I remember.
That's got to be the first one, because it was a double live.
Yeah. Recorded in Long Beach.
It was definitely before they got into the digital age, because there was no DVDs and CDs.
Yeah. And again,
it was a VHS tape that I played the hell out of.
Yeah, and again, a lot of this stuff, Dan, that we're talking about is I picked it just because it was the band's very first live album. That's what I remember, and then so that's pretty much my list. And then we'll let you get into your list now, Dan. Before we do, I have 2 more honorable mentions here. Okay, Tesla 5-man acoustical jam. That's a very important live album, not just for the band, but that's kind of a band that with their album. That's the one that had Signs and was a big hit for them, and it was after the release of that album that kind of MTV Unplugged got launched, and everybody else started doing this Unplugged stuff, but they were kind of the pioneers of it.
I didn't really get into Tesla much, so that's news. That's cool.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Tesla's one of those bands that they're kind of hard to pigeonhole, because when a lot of people think of Tesla, you think of stuff like Signs or Love Song, but if you go into some of the earlier albums or even the later ones, it seems like Tesla's one of those bands. They got a lot of metal stuff, but they got everything in between. I mean, they a lot of times get pigeoned as a classic rock band, which they really aren't, but they've got some deep stuff. And then Motley Crue put out a live album called Live Entertainment or Death. It's all right album, but I think it doesn't really stand out because it's one of those albums. It seems like it was kind of just pieced together. It's like live tracks from different concerts. But if you're a Crue fan, I think a much better investment would be this thing called Motley Crue Band. When they went on the farewell tour.
I saw a video of that too.
Yeah, on the farewell tour. See, that's the thing. You get a DVD of the live concert. You can watch that, and then if you're driving in your car, you have a CD to listen to. So let's get into your list now, Dan.
It starts off, it's pretty much just like yours, It starts off with Kiss, Alive 2. It's got Black Sabbath, Live at Last.
Yeah.
The 1987, the 70s, the old release.
Yeah.
Just the original ones.
Yeah.
And then, and then we already talked about what Kiss did with Alive, how they just pretty much changed the rules for live albums.
Oh, yeah.
Except for these guys, UFO, Strangers in the Night.
Yeah.
1979. So they were doing their tour, and it's an awesome. It's an awesome album. It's an awesome tour. It's one of those listed on the top 10 albums, of live albums.
Oh yeah, they always mention that. Yeah.
And what's really cool about this is, at the time, it's just like 4 years after Kiss Alive.
Yeah.
And everybody's going back in and overdubbing, redubbing, redoing their live stuff, and they're like, Mike, we want you to redo this, and this, and he says no.
Yeah.
I refuse to.
Yeah.
And if he says no, then the whole album doesn't get released.
Yeah.
So they have to release the album, and it's an accurate, it's 100% accurate account of what he can do live.
Well, that's amazing. Now, and you're right. That's I forgot about that after I put my list together. But like we were saying, there's just too many of these great live albums to kind of include here. But that's one of those. I've heard Eddie Trunk, like UFO. He's a huge UFO fan, and that's always number one on his list. But the thing is, you can't go wrong with Michael Schenker. I mean, I love UFO, but I think their heyday was when he was in the band. Nothing against many more of a guy in the band now, but it's just kind of you can never really truly replace a guy like Michael Schenker.
Yeah. And that lineup they had, and I don't know, everything about those recordings to make that album was perfect.
And then you got like
another perfect live album.
When you got Paul Chapman and Pete Way, who have since passed away the last couple of years, so it makes an album like that much more special because you're never really be able to reduplicate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then what else does I have on there? I got Cheap Trick Live at Budokan. Like we already talked about.
Yeah.
Not really one of my favorite bands. But it's definitely a landmark album.
Oh yeah.
For the band and for live recordings.
Yeah.
Ted Nugent, we talked about Tim, talked about Judas Priest. Uriah Heep Live, 1973.
Yeah.
Is another double live album that you get to hear Nick Box on guitar.
Yeah, and Uriah Heep.
And before Gary Thien died on bass.
Yeah.
Just another outstanding, overly tight band.
Yeah, Uriah Heep.
You're like, how can these guys be?
Uriah Heep. Yeah.
And be so freaking tight.
Yeah, Uriah Heep is one of those bands that for years I never understood why they were so underrated or underexposed here in the U.S. I mean, one guy that kind of shined a light on them was Blackie Lawless from Wasp. I mean, I remember he talked about what a huge fan he was of the band. I think Ken Hensley played on a couple of keyboards on a couple of Wasp albums, and so I just never understood why they really didn't break out in a bigger way here. But some of those bands, like Uriah Heep, they had much more success, I guess, in Europe because that's where they were originally from.
Yeah, definitely. And then I have 3 albums from the Oyster Colt.
Oh yeah, wow.
Because all 3 of them are just are outstanding examples of what this band was like live.
Yeah, and I guess
if you've never seen them live,
no,
then I would suggest getting Some Enchanted Evening.
Wow, okay.
That's from 1978. It's got everything that's perfect.
Yeah.
It's just like the title says.
Yeah.
Some Enchanted Evening, and it's a great album. The first one they did, On Your Feet or On Your Knees, is really, really freaking cool. And then in '82, Extraterrestrial Live.
Wow.
That's where you hear some of their other stuff like Joan Crawford and Black Blade and some of the other stuff. Their newer things.
Yeah.
That kind of like when they were. That was kind of like when they were ruling the world.
Yeah, they were much bigger in the '70s. But I tell you, Blue Oyster Cult is an interesting band because they have a ton of great songs, and you hear a lot of the stuff on the radio here in the U.S. and all over the world, but like because they had tracks like Don't Fear of a Reaper or Burning for You or Godzilla, a lot of times they would get lumped in as a metal band, and if you listen to anything else they've done, they're really not a metal band. I dare call them a classic rock band, but I even say they're closer to hard rock, but great stuff. And what always amazed me about Blue Oyster Cult, a lot of those classic songs are written by the drummer, Albert Bouchard, who's no longer in the band, but super talented guy that I recently had the honor of interviewing, and just super nice guy. And I mean, it's amazing just how many great Blue Oyster Cult songs there really are. And speaking of Albert Bouchard, anybody's interested, he's the new drummer in the Dictators, which is a legendary kind of pioneering punk band that featured Ross Sabbath on guitar, if anybody knows him from Manowar. They're coming back, so that's something to check out. But another great band, yeah. Blue Oyster Cult, definitely.
Nice. And there are a couple that I forgot to put on my list because as we're talking, my list just keeps growing.
Yeah.
Growing. There's 1975 Robin Trower Live.
Robin Trower, oh yeah. I mean, again, I'm not a huge Robin Trower fan, but I'll tell you.
Such an epic performance when he does a song called Two Rolling Stone.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it is freaking amazing. And this is kind of before he got like Bridge of Sighs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Became, every day, all the time on the radio.
Yeah.
This was kind of before that stuff, so it's a really good live album. When I was listening to just a little while ago, it was the Blues Brothers.
Oh wow! Yeah.
A briefcase full of blues, and it's kind of a guilty pleasure, but it is. It's definitely some good music.
Yeah, I don't know how you would classify the Blues Brother. I don't know if you consider them a real band, more of a comedy team. But I tell you, whatever it is, I love Dan. I don't listen to that a lot, but I'll tell you, what I always loved about the Blues Brothers, the movies, or even the music, is I love the way they were able to combine comedy with music.
Yeah, and they do that on this live album, and then plus on the live album that I have, they've got like famous blues musicians playing with them.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and
just
again,
kind of like they did in the movies, right?
Yeah.
So it's a really awesome album. If you ever get a chance to check it out.
Yeah, what that shows me is that you could take guys like you and me that aren't necessarily a huge fan of like blues music, but you could turn us on to stuff like that because of the comedy and the movies and everything. It's not something that I would maybe go buy a ticket to, but if somebody gave me a ticket to go see it, or I said, hey, they're playing down the street, I might go check it out just because it's so different and it's so easy to get into. That's one of those things where it really proves that music can really unify people, through comedy and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, and what else was that? Alice Cooper Show. The Alice Cooper Show.
Yeah.
That's another killer live album.
Yeah, that's from back in the day, but yeah.
Yeah, and what else?
Well,
Pantera, the one that I put on there,
Official
97.
Okay, yeah, Official Live.
101 Proof.
Yeah.
Official Live or something like that.
Yeah.
That's a really good album too. It's heavy,
Yeah. And
it's just what you want from Pantera.
and then another one we were kind of discussing before doing this today, through messaging one another, is that I had kind of forgotten about, is you were asking, hey, didn't the Eagles have a live album? And I had to kind of.
I thought they did some kind of. I thought they did something like back in the '70s, like Hotel California Date.
Yeah.
If they did something live back then, but I guess they didn't.
But it kind of made me remember they put out when the band originally reunited for the very first time in years. They did this MTV special, and they did release a live album from that, which had all the kind of greatest hits you'd expect to hear on there. It was called Hell Freezes Over, and they'd also added a few new studio tracks that they threw on there, which was kind of fun. And I can't believe that I forgot about that until you were asking, because not that I'm a huge Eagles fan, but I really love a lot of those greatest hits, especially anything off the Greatest Hits album and all that stuff you hear on the radio every day. But it kind of made me remember about the Eagles when that came out. I can't believe I even forgot about it,
Well, when I was asking you about that, I was like, oh yeah, that reminded me of Led Zeppelin. the song remains the same.
Yeah. Now.
And then How the West Was Won.
Oh yeah.
And so two really pretty awesome albums.
Now I got to ask you about the song remains the same. That's like, of course, a classic live album by Zeppelin. But how much of a did the movie affect what you thought of the soundtrack or album?
I listened to the album way before I saw the movie.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So when I saw the movie, I was like, yeah, this is cool.
And see,
I had already heard the music, listened to the album, played along with my bass, the whole works. Just like, yeah, I gotta go see it, I gotta check out the movie.
And it's interesting, the West Was One, that was a live album they put out like years later, and I think that was recorded in Long Beach, California, where I'm from, but I thought it was kind of a nice, have a nice second kind of live album from the band, because we heard Song Remains the Same for so many years. It's like, okay, we getting a little something, extra here.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were
always a good band, always a good live performance.
Yeah.
You hear stories about Michael Schenker. He's talking like years later after everybody's still praising, The Strangers of the Night. He's like, yeah, there could have been way better tracks on that album.
Yeah.
It's like it seems like all these guys go back and shake down some of their live performances, but they're still great. They're still freaking awesome.
Yeah, a few episodes ago we were talking about Alice Cooper's new album, Detroit Stories, and I bring that up because another cool thing that you get with that is they added on like extra DVD you get with that called Alice Cooper Live Paranorm. It was filmed and recorded somewhere in I believe England a couple years back on his last tour. And now what's a little different than the Alice Cooper show that you mentioned was you get a lot of the bigger hits that are more well known, and they include stuff like on there. So you put on the DVD, and it's a pretty cool thing. Like if you're an Alice Cooper fan, you're going to hear stuff like Brutal Planet and all the big hits. So again, talking about Alice Cooper, I just love the way he packages his stuff, and he's like, okay, not only going to get 15 new tunes on this studio album, we're going to throw in a live DVD if you didn't see it the first time around. and he doesn't charge anything extra. So as a fan, that's kind of cool. So anything else that you forgot to mention, Dan?
If I did, then I forgot.
Yeah.
There's just so many great live albums.
Yeah.
It's like Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Yeah, and maybe
Queen.
Yeah, there you go. The list goes on and on. But it's interesting too because these are all very like iconic live albums. I think you won't be surprised to hear anybody bring them up in a conversation. But it surprises me that there aren't like more bands that have these kind of like classic, iconic. Like take a band like Bon Jovi. I don't think they've really put out a live album. They've been around for years. You think why not? At this point, you got enough songs. Dio. They have a couple of like things they've released since he died. Like just this year they released this thing called Dio Holy Diver Live. I purchased it. Again, the only thing I think would made it better was if they could have included a DVD. I'm sure they have it somewhere. Who knows why they didn't? But it's actually it's a repackaging of something. They gave it a new title and I'll be honest, I bought it because I'm a Ronnie fan, and I thought, okay, I didn't get this the first time around, but I was happy I bought it, and I thought it's a cool performance from the Dio band, and I think it's got Rudy Sarzo on the bass, so killer lineup.
Shit, I just almost forgot.
Yeah.
DC.
Live at Donington? Yeah.
Earlier.
Oh, okay. What would that be? Refresh me.
If you want blood, we got it.
Oh, okay, yeah. Now that I gotta tell you, that's I think my all-time favorite AC/DC song. I mean, just because it says it all. It's raw. It's in your face.
And that's just another awesome live album.
Yeah.
And you get Bon Scott in there.
Oh yeah. Just can never go wrong with Bon Scott. And it's interesting that AC/DC's been able to kind of all throughout their career remain successful, and it's interesting because Bon Scott and Brian Johnson, fantastic singers in their own right, but if you listen to stuff, very different sounding, and that's why there really are two eras of AC/DC. And I've talked to many guys that play in AC/DC tribute bands, And the interesting thing is, if you go see an AC/DC tribute band, most of them are either going to do the Brian era or the Bon era only, because the guy seemed so drastic. In fact, I had one tribute band I interviewed where the guy was telling me, we got a guy that comes out, first half of the show, and he does Bon Scott, and then he goes off stage, and we bring a guy that does the Brian stuff. And again, that's a different way of doing it, but whatever works for you. Yeah.
I was watching some interview. I think it was an interview when they were talking. They were talking about how they found Brian Johnson.
Yeah.
And the AC/DC as a band was hanging out listening to Brian Johnson's band play.
Yeah.
And Bon Scott says, "That guy kicks ass."
Can you imagine? In a way, the guy that preceded you, that he kind of handpicked you.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it really is. And then his first album with the band is kind of a, Back in Black was a tribute to Bon Scott, and they were, Back in Black, even before Spinal Tap, they were the originators of the, Black album.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, in fact, speaking of, the Black album, I was just reading Metallica's Black album is celebrating 30 years. Can you believe it's been that long since that album?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Every time I hear that, it just reminds me I'm just getting freaking old, dude.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Like I saw something today that said Pac-Man is turning 41 years old.
Yeah, wow.
And I'm like, that just sucks.
Yeah, I mean, and a sign to me that we're getting older, Dan, is the older I get, the more and more, as each year passes, more and more of my heroes are dying, or people even that I grew up watching on TV. I'm like, okay, not much longer. And I guess as far as live albums, Dan, the final one to kind of bring up, I'd like to get your thoughts on. It's kind of always been a controversial release. Would be Live Evil with Black Sabbath. That's of course one with Ronnie James Dio. And Ronnie said over the years that had a lot to do with why he left the band, because people have been telling him that Geezer and Tony would go in and kind of overdub stuff, and he wasn't happy with that. What are your thoughts on that?
I didn't really
dig it.
Really like the album.
Yeah.
As I didn't like it as a live album, really. And I didn't really like it as a Black Sabbath album.
Yeah.
It, I don't know.
I mean, that's one of those albums.
It didn't really. I don't know. It didn't capture their sound.
Yeah, that's what I never really understood.
It wasn't like Live at Last.
Yeah.
Where you could just feel the distortion coming out of the speakers because it was just freaking loud.
Yeah, I mean,
It was just I don't know.
It amazes me that Black Sabbath hasn't really, because they are a great live sounding band, that they never were really able to capture that on any kind of official live release. I mean, I think they get pretty close to it. The other one they did with Ronnie James Dio when he first came back was Heaven and Hell live at Radio City Music Hall. I mean, I think that was a decent release, kind of a decent sound. They finally kind of captured it there, but I was surprised that album wasn't a bigger.
That last live album they did called The End.
Oh yeah, again.
Yeah, that one is probably pretty accurate.
Yeah. Yeah.
But by that time they had definitely slowed their act down a little bit.
Yeah. In fact, the drummer that played on that is this guy, Tommy Clufestos. He's like in the Dead Daisies right now. He's played with Rob Zombie, and he was just saying something about, I think it was nice that I got to play with Black Sabbath, but it's not something I'm constantly thinking of. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that would definitely be a highlight of my life, that's for sure.
Yeah. And what do you think about Bill Ward kind of being not allowed to take part? But I'm beginning to think it really did have more and more to do with his health, because he's saying, I mean, he's like 80-something years old or close to it. It's like, I really can't play like I used to. And drummers usually, their hands and everything are first to go.
Yeah. Unless he was still drumming.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I think I don't know if it's still going or not. But he had his own band going.
Yeah.
And I don't think he was even playing drums in that.
Yeah. I mean, I think.
But I kind of thought if they were going to do any kind of studio or anything like that they should have brought him back for that.
Yeah.
And then I I can understand he's not going to be able to go on live.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He wasn't going on live when they did Heaven and Hell.
Even Peter Criss, has kind of retired because he doesn't play like he used to. He suffers from carpal tunnel, but so it is what it is. And but I think these albums we mentioned, Dan, are just classic live albums, and I think they're classic albums for a reason. I think even a band like Cheap Trick, they really haven't released an official live album since that. And I think it's probably because how are you going to top that,
Right.
And Cheap Trick's credit, it's amazing. I think that album really put them on the map to the point that when it came time to do the next studio album, they did the Dream Police, which that's kind of a different type of album, but they were doing even heavier songs on that than what they were previously doing.
Right.
And Cheap Trick's one of those bands too, very much I was saying like Tesla. Very hard to pigeonhole because depending on what song you're talking about, they do everything from I Want You to Want Me to The Flame. And so if you were a Cheap Trick fan in the 80s and you thought, oh, that's what they did was songs like The Flame and, Don't Be Cruel. There was a different band previously, but they're one of those bands that can kind of do it all.
Right. Oh, you know what? You need to mention that I almost forgot to was a band called Angel.
Oh, Angel, yeah.
And they did a really awesome live album called Live Without a Net.
That's interesting because speaking of Van Halen that we also mentioned earlier, they have a live DVD they put out a number of years ago with Sammy Hagar when he first joined the band called Live Without a Net. But Angel is one of those bands, Dan, and I can probably name like one or two songs. I'm not a huge fan, but I'm aware of who the band was, and I think the only reason Angel wasn't bigger, probably their biggest competition at the time was Kiss, and they were on the same label.
They're actually they were put together as an anti-Kiss.
Interesting. And I know that's why
kind of funny.
They say that Gene Simmons never wanted Angel to open for Kiss because he was well, not only that, but he was afraid that they would kind of push be bigger than Kiss.
I wish that they didn't play the same show.
Yeah.
They definitely had a huge setup going on with their synthesizer keyboard thing.
Yeah.
It was like half the stage.
Yeah, and the bass player, Punky Meadows, he's still putting out like solo albums every now and then. And he's still doing it.
Angel just put out a new album like last year.
Yeah. And I think it would.
So they're still putting music out.
Yeah, and good for them because Angel's one of those bands I think should have been much bigger than what they were. They had their kind of heyday back then, but they never really got like over the top. And I think even with some of the newer stuff, like the album you said came out just last year, I think a little more people were starting to become aware of them. But then COVID hit, and I guess we'll end on this note, Dan. It's kind of interesting that since a lot of these albums, a lot of bands back in the day, they like even after they saw the success of Live at Budokan or Kiss Alive, they would start putting, okay, we're going to put out a live album too, but I dare say I can't think of it. What was the last great live album? So this is a pretty good list I think we've compiled.
Yeah. You almost have to say that once it all went to CDs.
Yeah.
It kind of lost its
flair.
It lost its fun.
Yeah.
I kind of think, I don't know, maybe it's just me.
I think
it's part of that. Could it just be part of the old me talking again? But it just seems like that was when live was better.
Yeah. I guess.
If you had your album, usually it was something full open. There was something to look at, and now it's just a quick download, and it's like, wow, that was kind of boring. Yeah,
I guess a lot of it has to do with the packaging, like you were saying. You can only do so much with the CD. And it's kind of interesting, like you're saying, because I've seen where they've had like limited runs of things. Like a couple of years ago, they put out a thing. I forget what they call it, but a package where you could get Kiss Alive 1, Kiss Alive 2, and Kiss Alive 3 all together in one ultimate package.
And then it comes with all the good, cool stuff that came with it?
No. But again, so, see that's the thing. Now, if you're a diehard Kiss fan like me, and you're like, oh, I want to have it all in one package. Okay, that's cool. But then I think the thing is, like you said, you're not getting any extra goodies like you originally did. And then you might have all 3 live albums, but which is the one you ultimately go to? Probably Kiss Alive 1, you know? So do I really need the other 2 if I've already got them? Yeah, so I don't know. And then what do you think? Like I said, Kiss is getting ready to release this thing called Kiss Live from a Soundboard, which, I mean, I hear people talk about something's recorded from a soundboard. It's supposed to be a better live quality. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I personally, so like with the radio show I do.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I'd go up to a venue, and I'd plug my mixer into their mixer.
Yeah.
So I'm broadcasting their soundboard.
Wow.
And then I would have 2 microphones for some extra ambience, right?
Yeah.
And I would have to say that it doesn't make any difference.
So that's a myth. That's a myth. Okay.
Because the only thing you're getting is just a different feed.
Okay. Oh, okay.
It's not like it's going to be
super.
It can't be any better than the master.
Yeah. And what in regards to live shows, what's your feelings on you get these bands saying, "Oh, we refuse to use tapes and stuff." I mean, what are your thoughts on like total live performance versus a band that has to use like backup tapes?
Like for like extra tracks and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean something. I guess even something as simple as like when Peter Criss used to come out and he wouldn't be behind the drums. He'd sit on the stage and they have like they had music to the tape, kind of playing what he's singing.
It doesn't matter so much.
Yeah, I mean if it sounds like
because you're not there to criticize the musician. You're there to see what they got to do.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like I never really got into it or saw any information about it, but I heard like there was this like hologram Dio tour.
Oh, okay, yeah. What that was is when he first died. I'm sure you've heard of Dio Disciples, which is kind of a surviving Dio members, and they would have like Tim Ripper Owens and Oni Logan. They would trade off in vocals and doing like all the Dio stuff from Rainbow and Dio and Black Sabbath. They put together a nice set list, and since Ronnie's no longer with us, somehow Wendy Dio, his wife and manager, had this thing created, kind of like this image, this projected image of Ronnie, that when the band's up there on the stage, they kind of project this image of Ronnie. And there's a lot of controversy because, okay, nobody's fooled into thinking that's really Ronnie James Dio, but some fans and some critics criticize it because, well, do I really want to pay all that money to see like a hologram of my dead hero, up there on stage? Or, I mean, I think it would be interesting to see, but even some of the guys in the band were saying it's kind of weird because Ronnie's not here, but they're projecting this image of him, and I don't know. I think if I had the opportunity to go, I would probably go just to kind of see what it was like. But I'd be honest, I'd much rather have the real Ronnie there, if we could.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just kind of weird what they do to try to.
Yeah. Now, if they were now, and I don't really have a problem with it. I'll tell you why, Dan. Because now, if this was trying to convince us that hey, Ronnie was back from the dead, or he didn't really die, or something, I might question. But they have other singers up there, so and when they first put together the Dio Disciples after Ronnie died, I remember going to see them perform like at Disneyland here in Anaheim, by where I live, and I'd never seen anything like it before, because you're thinking, okay, I just can't imagine anybody doing these Dio songs but Ronnie himself. But again, it was his surviving band members. It was Oni Logan from Lynch Mob and Tim Owens, who Wendy and Ronnie, helped launch their careers, help them out early on in their careers. And so these guys were, of course, they're doing it for a paycheck, but they're really, I left the show feeling like all these guys up on stage, they were performing these tunes like for the love of Ronnie. And the whole audience, we were joining in and singing the songs along with. It was really like Electric Church. So I got off on that, and I don't know what it'd like to be go see a Dio hologram. Interesting. but kind of weird at the same time. And I know they've had other ones like they've done for like Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston, and I think it's interesting, but I don't think it's quite the same thing as seeing the actual performer, you know.
Right.
But if you go,
just as long as it doesn't become like a trend, you know, it's like next month we have Elvis in concert or something like that, you know.
Yeah, and the thing with it too is, you know, keep it fun, I guess, but as long as the fans really aren't ripped off and they know what it is, you know, that's cool with me. But
as long as you're entertained, that's all that really matters.
But I wouldn't expect like for that to become a norm. I wouldn't expect, and then if I'm not getting the real performer, I hope I'm not going to pay even more money because it's a special hologram or tour or whatever. I mean, I would pay a lot more money to see the actual performer. Like I said, Ronnie can't be here, so I get it. But you know what I mean? And then I guess final thing we should mention here, Dan, because it just popped in my head. You also brought up another album I meant to include on my list when we were conversing this morning before the show. Aerosmith's Bootleg Live. Now to me, that's one of Ultimate Live albums because I guess it's properly titled because it sounds like a bootleg, but just so raw, so energy, so much energy there. But that's one of those live albums people kind of forget about. But hey, it is what it is.
Right.
And like you said, you listen to that, it's kind of you know, Aerosmith gets kind of tagged as a hard rock band and everything, but I even sometimes a pop band, but I just dare say they're a great classic rock band. And the thing with a band like Aerosmith, they're really, you put on that album, Live Bootleg, it really kind of gives you a real bluesy kind of feel for what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's similar like, you know, like somebody else that has some really awesome live materials, like early Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
You know, they're really super bluesy and really good stuff, though.
And someone's telling me, how big of a Rush fan are you? Somebody's telling me Rush has got a couple of good live albums.
Yeah, Rush has a couple of good albums. That Exit Stage Left is a good live album.
Yeah. Well, Dan, as always, it's been great talking to you. I look forward to next month's conversation. Me and Dan have already kind of decided we're going to be talking next month about Iron Maiden, and we're going to be talking about all kinds of things Maiden related. Just to give you guys kind of an appetite for what's coming up is next month we plan to talk about, of course, controversy about Iron Maiden not getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the fact that 2021 marks the 40th anniversary of a second Killers album, and then Dan and I were talking about, if you go back to those first two Maiden albums, a lot of Maiden's early career was kind of rooted in punk. So we'll be talking about all that and more. So thanks so much, Dan. You have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Jason. Talk to you later.
Hey, bye-bye.